J.R.R. Tolkien's Middle-earth has been around for more than 85 years. It's responsible for countless songs, video games, movies, trippy animated movies, Russian rip-offs of movies, and of course board games, perhaps the best being The War of the Ring by Eris Games. This thematic wargame follows the plot of all three books, as one player attempts to withstand the forces of evil and destroy the One Ring, while the other attempts to burn it all down to the ground. The War of the Ring has had a spot on the Board Game Geek hotness list for the better part of a decade, but like a pillowcase stabbed by a group of Nazgul, there are a few problems. 1. The majority of the 205 miniatures in this game are only 2 colors, yet represent 8+ factions. 2. Unpassable mountain ranges are represented by a small black line that can easily be missed by players. 3. Strongholds worth victory points don't stand out and can be covered by troops. 4. Some of the most important tokens, Tolkiens, in the game are boring flat pieces of cardboard, and are kinda confusing to look at. So embark on this journey with me over the course of 3 videos while I upgrade this legendary game with just some basic art supplies and without the help of a 3D printer. Let's get right into it by painting all the figures in this game. I start by giving them all a wash in soapy water and leaving them out to dry. This will clean up any grime or mold release left on the figures. Some of the figures have spears or banners that have become warped over time. To fix this, warm up some water in the microwave. It doesn't have to be boiling. Dip the warped part of the figure into the water and push them back into shape. This may take a few tries. Next, using some tongue depressors, I write out the names of the factions to help tell the pieces apart, and fix them down with an adhesive putty, then prime them. While there are plenty of amazing paint jobs out there that capture all of the details of these miniatures, I opted for something slightly more color-coded to really be able to tell the troops apart. Using the colors of the regions on the board as my guide, I use a white primer on most to make the colors more vibrant, but I would prime some black if they had a similar color to another faction. The plan is to do a base coat, then stain, followed by a dry brushing, to make the smaller details pop out. I'm trying to make them look like the little porcelain statues that come in your grandma's tea boxes. The characters for the Free People's player were painted white, while the characters for the Shadow player were painted black, and Gollum, who's somewhere in between, was painted gray. When the painting was complete, the pieces really stand out and most of the details remained intact. On the right-hand side of the board, you will find the politics track. Each faction in Middle-earth is represented here as they activate and move closer to war. The cardboard chips are kinda boring, and the faction logos can be confusing. I decided to make my own out of resin, and started by finding an object to mold. I like the look of this cabinet handle, so I used cardboard to create a casting box. The idea is that the casting material is poured into the box, and it will capture the shape inside of it. Hot glue was used to make sure there would be no leaks when casting, and it was important to be thorough with this step. To create a mold, I will be using Moldstar 16 Fast from Smooth-On. It is important to read the directions for any 2-part casting material to learn how long you have to work with it before it hardens, and how long it takes to cure. This type of silicone has a 6-minute pot life where it's workable and fully dries and cures in 30 minutes. Each part is stirred carefully and poured into separate cups to my measured size. Then both parts are mixed together. It is important to work quickly, but not to rush, since you can create air bubbles deep inside the silicone if you stir too roughly. The completely stirred mixture is poured into the casting box and then left on the level surface to harden. Once dry, the cardboard is cut away, and you have a mold you can start pouring resin into. I'm replacing the War of the Ring faction symbols with the ones from the Total War Middle-earth Reforged mod. I like how big and graphic these are, and they were colored to match the regions on the board and the newly painted figures. There is also a desaturated black and white version of the icon for when the faction is not yet activated on the politics track. Both versions of the icon were cut out and glued together back to back. Now to calculate how much resin will be needed for each cast, I pour water into the mold. I then pour that water into a cup and weigh it on an ounce scale. An empty cup is also measured, and its weight is subtracted from the one containing the water to give us the exact amount of resin needed. Both parts of the resin are measured out separately, then mixed together thoroughly. Colored inks can be mixed in to increase the saturation. Most of the resin is poured into the mold, then the icon is placed, with the remaining resin poured on top. I check on the token before it cures to make sure the icon is level. A lighter can be used to pop any air bubbles inside the resin, but you need to make sure not to burn it. After 24 hours, the resin cures and was able to be removed from the mold. Ultimately, I wasn't happy with these since I thought they were too big and I used too much ink, making it harder to see the icons. So I started over, but this time made the mold using Scrabble blocks. I also decided to use a wooden plug to create a half-sphere mold for some of the other tokens in the game. When building my new casting box, multiple Scrabble blocks were used so more tokens could be cast in one sitting. The resin takes about 24 hours to cure, so this saved a lot of time. These are the fully cured faction tokens. The corruption, victory point trackers, and revealed ring tokens were cast in the spherical plug mold. The sides of the tokens were cleaned up with an X-Acto blade, sanded with fine grit sandpaper, and painted black. The fully finished pieces match their painted infantry counterparts perfectly, and don't overcrowd the politics board when in play. I also found this old Ring of Power from the Lord of the Rings Risk game. It will replace the ring cardboard token, and it's the perfect size for the corruption and revealed tokens to fit in between. The Elven Rings of Power allow the forces of good to reroll their faction dice once before being corrupted by Sauron, and these cardboard tokens were just not exciting enough. While there are plenty of reference photos of the Elven Rings from Peter Jackson's movies, I wanted to go a different route and make my own. Because this game has its own visuals to set it apart from the movie trilogy, but also because I'm not doing Kate Blanchett's Nenya. It's not happening. The Elven Rings of Power were sort of like a surprise Trojan horse attack from Sauron on the elves. So I wanted them to feature imagery of an eye, since that's like Sauron's calling card. But Sauron didn't make the Elven Rings of Power, Celebrimbor did. But he was affected by Sauron's binding magic, so it's possible he would have made them with eyes. I'm thinking too much into this, it's fine. So just like Celebrimbor, I am forging these rings with a piece of costume jewelry, a socket wrench, and some super sculpty clay. Starting with Narya, this is the red ring worn by Gandalf. A piece of clay is rolled down to the thickness of this basswood. I wrap the clay around the 15mm socket and cut it to size. I prop up my knife with some other pieces of basswood and spin the clay around it to make sure I have a level cut. Seams where the clay was cut can be smoothed out by rolling the socket back and forth. A fake diamond from the costume jewelry was cut off and pressed into the clay. Then using a clay extruder, small strands of clay were made to build up the detail on the ring and to create that eyeball motif. I continued to work with the clay until I got something I liked, and the excess clay was cut away. Next up is Vilya, the blue ring worn by Elrond. It was originally owned by the Elven King Gil-galad, who's only in the extended cuts of the movies for like 3 seconds before he dies. And he also owned Narya at one point too, but then he gave it to Cúradan, the shipbuilder, who was also only in the movies for like 5 seconds. And none of this is important. I don't know where I'm going with this other than I guess Peter Jackson released the Gil-galad cut. This ring was made following the steps of the previous, but to make it visually different, a backing for the stone was made, and using a piece of wire and a drill, this ornate spiral band was created. The wire was clipped off, wound around a smaller socket, and then pressed into the clay. The jewel was then added in, and some more details were sculpted. Last up is Nenya, the white stone mithril ring worn by Galadriel. This ring was created by extruding 5 coils of clay and twisting them together to make the central band. It was cut to size and smoothed together. This housing for the stone was created by using 2 pieces of extruded clay. When the stone was added, the backing kinda looked like a flower. It's the closest we're gonna get, sorry. The stone was added to the band and smoothed together. A final piece of clay was extruded to sit on top of the wrapped coil. Then any details lost while sculpting were cleaned up. Super Sculpty is a polymer clay, so it has to be baked at 275 degrees to harden. So all that was left to do was to open my oven and
cast it into the fire!
When the clay finished baking, the rings were cut off of their socket wrench holders. A Dremel was used to clear away more clay and to give the rings smooth, curved edges. And an X-Acto blade was used to cut off any leftover burrs. All the rings were primed silver. Narya and Vilya were painted with gold colors, then stained with Agrex Earthshade, while Nenya was stained with Nuln Oil. Once dry, they were dry brushed with Citadel metallic paints. Nenya's stone was painted with White Scar, while Narya and Vilya were painted with the technical paints Spirit Stone Red and Soul Stone Blue. The rings really come to life now and will make you second guess using them and handing them over to the Shadow Player. We got a lot accomplished in this first video, but our journey is just starting. In the next episode, I will be constructing 3D versions of all 24 of the strongholds, cities, and fortifications located in Middle-earth. It's going to be a lot of work, so be sure to check it out.
What are we waiting for?